In today's video, we'll be tearing down this UniFi CloudKey Gen 2 Plus with the goal of removing the built-in lithium-ion battery. This video is a follow-up from my previous video where I replaced my UniFi UDM Pro with a pfSense router. And because I was doing that, I needed to move my UniFi controller and UniFi Protect onto a different device. I already had this CloudKey Gen 2 Plus from when I used to use this with a UniFi USG Pro. However, I stopped using it because the battery has failed. These CloudKey Gen 2 Pluses have a built-in lithium-ion battery. And the idea is that if the power supply to this ever fails, the battery just gives it just enough power to cleanly shut itself down. It won't ever run on its battery. Essentially, you disconnect the mains and it'll pop up saying shutting down and it'll shut itself down cleanly. However, the battery has failed in this, so now when you unplug it from the mains power supply, it immediately shuts off. And it got to the point before that it was degrading where it would say shutting down, it would begin to shut down and then it would cut off, and it's now got to a point that the battery does nothing. I've looked online and it seems like this is a very common issue. A lot of people are saying they've had these issues, and I've seen people taking the devices apart and find the battery has really badly swollen. So when I saw that, I immediately took this out of service and just moved UniFi Protect onto my UDM Pro, because I just didn't want to have the risk of a device running 24/7 with a known failing battery in it that could be expanding, especially given how hot these get. In fact, I do suspect that's maybe why the battery in this has failed, is these cloud keys get extremely hot. And especially this one, it sat in a rack between two machines on a rack shelf, and it probably didn't have much ventilation around it. Realistically, in my mind, these aren't really that well designed in the sense that they get that hot and they cook their batteries. But yeah, the battery seems to have failed in this, and I suspect it's maybe due to the heat. But yeah, I took this out of service because of that, and even though I need to put this back into service now, I don't want to put this in with the battery in place. However, it doesn't really need the battery to run, and given the battery's failed anyway, there's no real difference between running it with the battery in it or with the battery completely removed. So in this video, what we'll do is we'll pop this open, take it apart to see how it's built, just out of interest, and see how we can remove the battery. So hopefully if other people have devices like this as well, and they also want to remove their failed batteries, this could be useful. So here we have the CloudKey Gen 2 Plus. This is a device from Ubiquiti Networks as part of the UniFi line. Essentially, it's a UniFi controller, so it can manage access points, switches, some of their firewalls, that kind of stuff. So it can act as a controller for that, and it can also run UniFi Protect. So if you're wondering why I'm putting this back into service and not just self-hosting a UniFi controller, that's because of UniFi Protect. If all I cared about was just managing UniFi devices, I would happily self-host a controller. However, I also have some UniFi cameras that run with UniFi Protect, and they need to run on a cloud key or a UNVR or a Dream machine. So that's what we're doing. So this device here, pretty nice looking thing. Just sort of aluminium like that. Around the back you can see you've got a quick charge to USB port for powering it, a USB-C port for connecting external storage, and an Ethernet port that also supports PoE. So I'll power this over PoE, that's how I used to run this, and also a micro SD card slot. There's also a rack mount kit available for this. I'm not going to be using that. You've then got a little OLED screen on the front that shows some status and a hard drive bay, so you can do that, remove the hard drive, and as you see in there, we have I think it's a 1 terabyte hard drive. It's original to the device, this came with it. So yeah, it's a 1 terabyte hard drive for storing UniFi Protect recordings. And it's a pretty nice little device. However, because the battery's failed, I want to take it out. So first of all, to be fully upfront, because I'm always sort of upfront when I'm doing a teardown or something if I've peeked before I did the video, because usually I don't. Well, if you look around the back here, you'll see there's a few little cracks. I have already been inside this. Also, if you look at the OLED on the front, there's also a bit of a slight crack in it. So yeah, I have already been inside this before and failed to take it apart. So now I've figured out how to actually take it apart, I'll be demonstrating this properly. So this is me learning from how not to take one of these apart to demonstrate how you are to take one of these apart. So yep, I have accidentally broken the OLED, so whoops. It's not that essential, it still works without it. But yeah, so if you see any little marks, I have already tried to take this apart. And then there's also, I think, a bit of a dent on the top of it there, which is where one of my studio lights fell on it, so that wasn't ideal. But yeah, time to take this apart. So obviously, this device is not really designed to be serviced. So if you are taking one of these apart, it is a risky process. Now, hopefully you can learn from my mistakes and you won't damage your OLED or damage the back panel. However, these are all very thin bits of material that are glued onto other parts. They're not easy to take apart, so be very careful and kind of don't be too surprised if you do damage it. You'll probably not break it completely to the point it's irreparable, but cosmetic damage is quite a high likelihood when you're doing this kind of repair because it's so fiddly to take apart. However, realistically with me, well, I've already broken it anyway, but with this my logic was I'm not going to use it with the battery installed, so I may as well try and fix it, because either I can still use it with like a broken OLED or a bit of cosmetic damage, or it literally sits on a shelf and I can't use it. And personally, I couldn't even sell this in good faith, knowing that it's got a failed lithium-ion battery inside it that's going to be sitting constantly trying to charge or whatever. So yeah, time to take this apart. So obviously I've shown one of the first steps taking this apart is to remove the hard drive, so that's easy enough to do. So you have this little hard drive release switch here, so that slides along. I find it's a bit stiff, so I find it's easier if you kind of squeeze the hard drive in, then slide it along, then it'll release. That's an easier way to get it out. Hard drive comes out, that's the specs of the drive there. It's just a standard SATA laptop drive in a little carrier there, so you can easily swap it out if you want to. I presume it's toolless to get it out of this carrier, potentially. Yep, it literally just comes out of this in a sort of toolless way, I think, but I'll leave that in because I don't really need to take that out. So yep, that's hard drive now removed. So what we now need to do is tackle this back panel. Now this is just stuck on, so you just need to kind of carefully lever it off. As you can see, I have cracked mine here, and I think here as well. The glue was quite tight, and the problem is, especially say this piece here, it's a really, really thin bit of plastic. There's not much there between the port and the edge of it, so the likelihood to crack it there is quite high. Now when I did this, I think I just went at it straight away. This was ages ago I did this. I sort of did it ages ago, gave up, and then now I'm coming back to it because I need to put it back into use. I think I probably just went straight at it with a spudger. I would probably recommend trying to heat this up. Obviously don't like do anything stupid, but maybe just carefully with a hairdryer or like low temperature heat gun just to try and soften that glue might reduce the likelihood of causing these sorts of cracks. But you may end up cracking it. It's just one of those things that might happen. However, it is on the back, you're not really going to see it, so it's not the end of the world if you do. So what I'll now do is I'll work on getting the back off this. Okay, so I've now removed the back plate, so I was able to just kind of heat it up and then carefully go in round the edges with a spudger and just try and cut the glue underneath. But the glue is extremely sticky even after heating it up and even after already having taken this off. So I suspect you're going to end up breaking it. I mean, you can see the amount of glue on the back there. So I got it off in one piece. Well, it's already broken, but I didn't break it any more than I already had, but I would maybe expect that you're going to cosmetically damage that. But now that's removed, you can see we have some screws. So all we now need to do is undo those tiny little screws and get off this back plate. So I'll go and do that. Okay, so I've got a screwdriver here, so just need to undo these tiny little screws. And with all these removed, that back plate should just lift off. So I'll go do that off camera, and we'll come back. Okay, so that's all those screws now removed. Also, interestingly, I just sort of spotted while I was doing that. You can see this cutout here, and I think that's for some sort of antenna, because this has built-in Bluetooth. So I think it's like set up with the app. So now that's removed, all the screws are out, this plate comes out, and now we can see the inside. And that's us now done around the back. So looking around the front, you've got the OLED panel, and we need to remove this, and there's a couple of screws behind there. So first of all, you have this decorative trim piece on the front that's glued on, so you'll need to carefully remove that. Now I've already loosened this one off, and because I've been in here so many times, it's already quite loose, so it's easy enough for me to take off. However, you'd probably need to heat this up and be extremely careful. And that reveals the OLED, which is behind here. And now this is where we can see these two screws. There and there. That is ridiculous. So you basically have to take the OLED out to get to that screw. And as you can see, this is where I kind of broke the OLED. Now, I have found another teardown video someone did on YouTube. And in that one, when they took this piece off, the OLED came off attached to this and hinged away. So first of all, if you are taking this off, be very careful because your OLED might come out attached to this, at which point you just move it out of the way and undo those screws. However, in mine, this piece came off separately, and then the OLED, it has glue or some sort of adhesive behind it, attaching it to the case. So that design made it a lot harder because you had to try and get in behind here and try and remove that OLED. Whereas if it was more like that other person's design, where when they took off this, the OLED was stuck to this, then that would probably be easier and you're less likely to damage the OLED. Now, I don't know why some people would have one or the other one. Now, one thing to mention is this is potentially a very early release or even a pre-production release. I got this as a review sample from Ubiquiti way back when I did my initial UniFi setup. They sent this over to me to review. So It may be this was a very early model, and in the early models or the pre-production models, they glued the OLED into the case, and on later models maybe they started sticking the OLED to this and not to the case. I don't know. So when you're taking this off, prepare that the OLED might actually come out stuck to this piece and not to this. So be careful when you're taking this off. However, as you can see on mine, the OLED was actually stuck to the case internals, not the front panel, so I had to try and remove it. And this is how I broke it. I was trying to get it out and I was rushing and I just wasn't really thinking, and I put a tiny little chip in the corner of it, and it still worked. It made no difference. Tiny little chip, and I was like, okay, I really should probably heat this up. So I went and heated it up, and it heated up and the glue softened really nicely and it eased off really nicely. However, because I had tried it without heating it up first, that little chip, as soon as I put the slightest bit of pressure on it, it cracked, and that was game over. So I suspect potentially if I'd heated this up from the start and been extremely careful, I may have been able to soften the glue and lever this out without damaging it. However, I've broken it. So it's not the end of the world. Realistically, on these, all the OLED does is it shows a little bit of eye candy around the IP address, I think how much network traffic's maybe going over it, how much camera traffic's going in, how many cameras are active last time they saw motion, that kind of stuff. But for me, it's sitting away in a cupboard. I'm never going to look at it. And in fact, this one, it spent many years running 24/7, and the OLED's actually got some really bad screen burn. I mean, it's not got much screen burn now, it's dead, but it had really bad screen burn, so it didn't even look that good anyway. So it's not the end of the world, and you can realize that you can still use this even with the OLED completely dead. Like, this status LED shows everything you really need to know about what it's doing. So yeah, it's a little bit annoying I've damaged it, but it's fine. All I'll do is I'll just strategically put a sticker, put a label over that with the IP address or something to kind of hide it. But now that it's already broken, I can easily enough ease it out, and I've already kind of deliberately made this glue behind here less sticky so I can easily get it out for this video, but this was really sticky on the back. So now with that removed, we can now see we have 2 more screws here. Additionally, the OLED does unplug from the main PCB here. I'm going to carefully pull that out just to get it out of the way. I can't remember if you need to. I don't think you do, but I'm going to take it anyway because it's a tiny little connector on the PCB there. It's easy enough to pull out, and it's also going to be relatively easy just to carefully slide that back in there when you're done. So I'm choosing to take the OLED out just to get it out of the way, but you could probably leave it in if you'd rather, but I'll pull it out. So with that out there, we now have these 2 screws that were hidden behind it. So all we need to do is take these out, and then we're almost ready to take the internals out. Not quite, there's another step, because of course there is, but we're getting there. At least all the screws seem to be the same size. That's one good thing going for this thing's repairability, but yeah, not much. So now they're out, we're almost ready to start removing this, but there's a couple little more steps we need to do. Okay, so by the time you've done all this, you might think you're now ready to take it out, and this is how far I got before, and I just couldn't quite figure it out because it just wasn't moving. I felt this should be sliding out. If I've undone all the screws, why won't it come out? Well, there's 2 more little bits that would really catch you out if you didn't know they were there. So they are this Cloud Key rack link connector here and the hard drive release switch. So we'll tackle the hard drive release switch first. Essentially, as you can see, this clips through here and through this mechanism on the inside. But because we want to slide this entire mechanism out, this has to come off. So we need to take the switch out. Now, it's going to be really hard to see, but if you look in there, just coming out, okay. If you look in there, you can see that switch comes up onto this plastic clip here. And essentially it's 2 pieces of plastic, one clipped over the front, one clipped over the back. So all you need to do is squeeze these together to release the switch. However, I found that when the switch is in this position here, where it's sitting sprung fully out, it kind of wants to spring a little bit further. The mechanism's still trying to pull it further this way, and the switch is stopping it. So that additional resistance there from that spring makes it quite hard to undo that clip. So what I found helps is if you slide this mechanism along with your finger to sort of slide the switch like the middle, and then try and undo that clip, it's a little bit easier. Now, I'll go and do it off camera because it's in such a tricky position to try and do this, but essentially what I did was slide this along a little bit, and then just using a screwdriver or something, I was able to kind of get in there and flick that clip and undo it. Again, bear in mind this is brittle plastic, you might break it, but hopefully not, because that would be very annoying if you broke it. But all you need to do is, yeah, slide this along and try and undo that clip. It's one of those things, once you've got one in front of you, it'll make a lot more sense. But yeah, the trick to remove that is you need to remove that clip, and sliding this metal piece along slightly helps. So I'll go and do that off camera, and then we'll come back. Okay, we've got it out, so that'll now come out like that. And if you look on the bottom, now it's out, it might give you a better idea of what you're looking at. It's a clip that looks like that, so you want to try and squish this together and pull it out through the metal. So that's now removed, so now that has freed this part of the mechanism from the case. The final bit is this Cloud Key rack link connector, and this really tripped me up because I just didn't think of this. And in fact, when I first got this, it actually had a sticker over it, so this had a black sticker, so you couldn't even see the connectors, but if you take that off, that's a rack link connector. This is because they sell a rack mount kit for this, so you can clip it into the rack mount kit, and that has, I think it's maybe got a status LED, but it's also got a network connection in the front of it. So this sort of connector here means that when you can put this into the rack mount, it'll connect the network connector on the front up to this, and I think potentially connects like a status LED or something as well into this, so that's what that is. But we also need to remove it to get it out. So this again is just clipped in, so all you need to do is just get a spudger. I mean, for this entire thing, you really need a thin metal spudger like this. You need to get in around the side and just carefully unclip it. There's a clip in each corner, so there's 2 clips on each side, and you want to undo it. So there's one side undone. There we go. So that's it now removed. So you can see there, if you look on the back, there's 2 clips there and 2 clips there. So you just need to undo those clips. That lifts up, and on the back you'll see there's a connector. So all I'm going to do is carefully disconnect that connector from it. Oh, I say carefully disconnect that connector from the bottom of it. There we go. There we go. So that connector's now pulled out. That connector is now removed there. That can now slide down into there to keep it out of the way. And now we can finally remove the shell from the case. So to do this, with everything else done, making sure you've done absolutely everything, you've not left any little plastic clips in or any screws because you're just going to damage something, you can now slide this out the case through the front. So mine actually comes out relatively easily. I have seen people say where the batteries are swollen, that they've swollen up so much it becomes really difficult to remove it. And straight away you can start seeing the battery there. So obviously be careful as well, because if you're pulling yours out and your battery has swollen, you have a bit of a metal edge here right above the battery, so you'd want to be really careful you don't catch or damage the battery in any way on that. I'd probably recommend doing this like outside or with a bucket of sand or something. You can quickly get rid of it if the battery did go up. I'm being an idiot, so I'm not doing that, but I would really recommend being very careful with this battery. So I'm going to carefully ease it out, and there we go. So that is the internals of the Cloud Key. So now we've just got an empty aluminium shell, nothing in there, so let's put that out off to one side, like that. And now we have the insides. So here we are inside the Cloud Key. So there's the battery, the 7.5 volt, 300 milliamp hour battery. Not a very high capacity battery at all, but it doesn't really need to be, it's just like a little UPS. Mine doesn't look, it's not as swollen as some of the ones I've seen, but it definitely, yeah, that cell there. So this cell here feels kind of solid and firm. This one at the front is not. That's a spicy pillow. That's a very, very, very puffy, soft battery. So yeah, that's definitely not right. So that has absolutely failed, and I need to take that out. But before we do that, we'll take a quick look at other things. So just a little rough interest. I'm not going to go into too much. I'm not going to take this apart too much, but why not? Let's take it apart fully. So that's the battery there. It's connected on here. So first thing we'll do is we'll take the battery out, because that's what the main purpose of this video is. And then I'll see if I can go a little bit deeper to take more of this apart. I'm not sure how deep I'll go. So yep, as you can see, the battery is connected on there. So we want to unplug that connector from the main board to disconnect the battery. It is coming out, but it's a little bit tight. So I'll need to try and pull that out carefully. I'll go and do that off camera. I think I just need some pliers or something just to get enough of a grip. There we go. So pull that connector out. Surprisingly long wire on that. There we go. So that's the cable for those batteries. So for that battery, so that's out there. So now we need to remove the battery. Now it looks as though the battery is actually sort of stuck in with adhesive around the side. I'm going to go and try and get off camera, try and remove that adhesive and just take it off with the spudger. But I'm doing that off camera because I want to be extremely careful, because I don't want to, the last thing I want to do is be rushing, reaching over a camera trying to do this and damage something. So I'll go off camera, try and get rid of that adhesive and get the battery out. But I'll do that in a sort of safe location, not surrounded by cameras and cables and trip hazards leaning over in the way over a wooden table. So I'll go away and do that, and then we'll come back. Okay, that's it now out. It wasn't actually as bad as I thought, but this sort of silicone around the outside isn't really what's holding it in at all. It's actually a sticky pad underneath in the middle, so you'll need to try and very carefully, pry it off of that. So that's the battery now removed, and as you can see, yep, that is definitely swollen up. So there seems to be two sort of cells in here. This one here at the back seems fine. This one at the front definitely, I mean, that's a little bit swollen, but this one at the front is definitely completely swollen up. So yeah, this has definitely failed, so it needed to come out. So that's the original battery there. And now you just need to carefully dispose of that. So now that's out of the way, we've now got the device is defused, it's now safe. So obviously at this point you would just put it back together if you're normal, but I thought, why not take it apart a little bit further and see how far we can get into this, just see if there's anything particularly interesting. So what I'll do is there's just a few little screws I can see on the main PCB. I'll take those out and see what's underneath. If I can't get any deeper or it's going to get a bit risky or destructive, I'm not going to do any more. But if I can get these screws out and lift the PCB out, we'll take a look at what's underneath. Okay, so I've removed those screws. I've left these two screws next to the SATA connector in. These don't actually secure this to the case. These seem to secure the SATA connector to the PCB. So I presume it's some sort of like ruggedness improvement to stop this being bent and damaged and break the solder traces. So I've left those two in because I don't want to damage this connector. But with those other screws removed, this board now lifts out. So there's one more antenna cable connecting to that antenna on the case. It's hot glued in place, so I'm not going to try and remove that. You could, because it is just a plug-in connector, but I'm not going to risk removing that, there's no point. But with that removed, you can now see on the underside of this board. So there's that big cable that goes to the rack link. Interestingly, in here there's a few twisted pairs. In fact, there's 4 twisted pairs, so I suspect that would presumably be the Ethernet connection, would be those twisted pairs, with the other ones being presumably power or LED or something like that. It's interesting to see the twisted pairs, but yep, that would make sense because it does carry Ethernet over that. Also, it connects here near where the Ethernet connects in. So yeah, what I'll now do is I'll go away, take a quick look, just see if there's anything of note to mention, just to kind of work out what I'm looking at here, and then we'll talk about it. Okay, so I've gone away and taken a look. Unfortunately, almost all the components are under this sort of heat spreader here, and I'm not going to risk taking that off. It's clearly sort of stuck on with a heat spreader pad. It's not worth the risk. I do actually want to use this. But they're under there. In terms of what this has, it's got an 8-core ARM CPU that's 2 GHz. Can't find much more information than that. I could probably dig into SSH into this to see what it says, but some sort of 8-core, 2 GHz ARM chip, 3 gigabytes of RAM, and 32 gigabytes, I think, of eMMC storage, which runs the OS. And then, of course, you'd have the 1 terabyte hard drive in here. The only sort of chip I found that is identifiable is on the underside here. You can see there's a chip here, and that's an A6 AX88179. And that's a USB 3 to gigabit Ethernet controller. So I presume the SoC they're using this doesn't have Ethernet built in, so instead they're using this to connect one of the USB ports on the ASIC, or one of the USB ports on the SoC, over to the gigabit Ethernet port. So that's all that is there, just a USB 3 to gigabit Ethernet controller. So yep, that's it there. So all we need to do is carefully put this back together. So I'm just going to carefully get that antenna cable in a sensible route, get this cable for the rack link poked through the bottom just so it's not going to get caught anywhere, and then get this PCB placed back down into the case and screwed back in. So get that through there, carefully get the back of it in, obviously allowing for that USB 3 port or USB-C port to poke through the back, and then we can hopefully, yep, get it to fold all flush down like that, get those screws in, and start putting this back together. Okay, so that board's now in, so we're now ready to put this back in the case. But before we do that, one thing I have noticed is a bit of a silly design with this, and I suppose it's the only way they could really do it to put it in this form factor. But obviously you've got the CPU here that's also going to get quite hot, and they've put the battery right on the other side from it. So I suspect this is also possibly why the battery's got a little bit hot in these. The battery is literally on the opposite side from the CPU. So of course this is going to get hot and it's going to cook it. And these devices did get really hot in operation, so yeah, it's not probably the best design there. But yep, that's now there. So what we now need to do is put it back into the case. So fold that connector flat, take the shell like this, and then we're just going to slide it carefully back in. Of course, it's much easier to put in now there's no battery there. It's bulging out. Get that in like that. Seems to be catching on something. I think it's this connector's catching, so just try and fold that connector completely out of the way so it doesn't catch on anything. Like that there. Might need to fold that completely flat there. There we go. The connector was catching on the edge, but that's now in there. And we've got the connector sort of free and poked through up there, so that's good. So now that's all there. What I'll now do is I'll put these I'll put all the case screws in just to get this sort of stable within the shell, and then we'll get the other little bits clipped back in. So all I need to do now is put the 2 screws in the front and all those screws in the back. Well, sorry, put the 2 screws in the front, put the metal plate in the back, and then put all the screws in the back. So I'll go away and do that, and then we'll come back. Okay, so that's all now all the screws in the front and the back with the metal plate in place. So all we now need to do is reinstall the OLED and put the front panel on. I keep saying all we need to do now when actually there's a lot more things to do now, but oh well. So yep, I'm going to carefully plug this in. It's a very fiddly connector. Now, I'm demonstrating how to plug this in. I probably actually shouldn't plug this in because it's broken, so I might actually disconnect it, but that's the OLED in there. So I'll leave it connected, it seems fine. Actually no, I won't because it's cracked, it might be shorting out internally. So if you wanted to leave the connect your OLED because you hadn't broken it, you'd plug it in there and fold it flat. I'm actually going to disconnect that because it's broken, so I'll disconnect that and I'll put a bit of tape over the end, and I'll just keep it safe inside here, but I won't actually connect it because I don't want to risk that damaging it. So yeah, the cable folds behind it just to keep it out of the way, but I'm going to leave that disconnected just in case it's shorted out internally or something. Don't want to cause any more damage. So that's the OLED there. Obviously you'd leave yours connected, and then what you then do is probably clean that free of fingerprints. Not as it really matters because it's broken. And then you'd stick the front panel here, back over it. Again, you probably want to make sure the inside of that's clean because any dirt or dust in there is going to be stuck on there permanently. So to clean that, and that will just stick on over there. The original adhesive is super sticky, so I suspect yours will stick again fine without any issue. I mean, this has been taken off several times and it's still sticking on there reasonably well. But if you needed to, you might need to use additional glue or something, but that's stuck on there. So we're getting there. 2 final things we need to do. We need to put this connector on and put the hard drive connector switch back on. So the rack link connector is really easy to do. We just need to get this connector pulled out the case. There we go. And then just plug it into this connector. It should only go the right way around. Just carefully plug that in there. Like that. And with that plugged in, this will just slide into the case and click in place. It's a little bit fiddly to get the 4 clips in. I found it takes like a bit more force than you probably want to really put on it, but you just need to clip these in and then get the drive connector back in, or the drive release switch back in. Okay, so that's back in. It did just take an unreasonable amount of force to clip all that down. So now what we need to do is get the hard drive release switch in. So a couple things to take note of. It's not symmetrical, so you need to make sure it's lined up with the hole in the case there, obviously. The other thing to note is, obviously you can see the hole on the inner slider piece it needs to clip into. By default, that slides way too far over. So what you'll need to do is you need to slide it so this is actually sitting sort of in the middle there and clear of whatever that black piece there is, and then clip it on. So I won't be able to do that on camera, but basically what you're going to want to do is slide it like that there, and then with it in that position, you're going to take the button like that, and then you're going to be able to hopefully line it all up and clip it through. And I said I won't be able to do it on camera, and there we go, I did it on camera. So that's in there. So now with that, in theory, the hard drive will slide in and clip in place. Yep, that worked fine. Hopefully it comes out again. Yep, that also removes fine, so that's good. That works. So all we now need to do is put my beautifully broken piece of plastic back onto the back of it. So just like that. And then with that, it's now reassembled. So even though the OLED's broken, it's a little bit cracked on the back, it didn't get too badly damaged, maybe. So yep, that's all now done. So all there's left to do now is fire this up and check it still works. Okay, so now let's try this out. So I have an Ethernet connection here, so I'll plug that into the back. Now this isn't PoE, now this is PoE capable, so when I'm actually using this in production, it'll probably be powered over PoE, but because this connection here isn't PoE, I'll need to plug a quick charge to compliant power supply in as well. And you see, light starts flashing. It now starts slow blinking, so that seems to be starting up. It's now blinking blue. No hard drive activity yet, so we'll just leave that and see what happens. So I'll let this boot up. Now, it is annoying that it doesn't have the OLED now that would tell me exactly what it's doing, but this actually does represent what it's doing. It's a sort of status code thing showing the boot process. So I'll let this start booting up, and we'll come back once it's booted. And we're back, so it's now booted. Now, if you notice in that previous clip, it was like flashing, like blue and then white and then back to blue again. It turned out that was an error code and it wasn't actually booting, so I panicked, like flailed around, panicking, swearing, thinking this video was ruined because I'd broken it, and then I wouldn't be able to use it in the next video because it was also broken, or the next video that you're seeing that I'm recording next but you'll have seen previously. Anyway, I thought I'd broken it. Turns out it was just a power supply. I plugged it into this Ugreen folding sort of 65 watt gallium nitride charger, which I just assumed would support quick charge too, but I suspect maybe it doesn't. It supports PPS and power delivery and everything I would actually need, but I just assumed this would also support that, but it didn't seem to. So instead I'm now using this other power supply. This is a Ugreen 100 watt gallium nitride one, and this was able to do it. This must support quick charge. So with it plugged into this, it powered up absolutely fine. It's white because it's not fully set up yet. I ended up having to factory reset it because I couldn't remember the password for the life of me. But that's now connected to the network, and now if we look at it, we can see we're now able to easily pull up the setup wizard and continue through the setup. So it's working. So yeah, that's really all there is for this video. Now it's all ready. I'm going to go away and get this all set up, get Protect set up, get UniFi network set up, and get this ready so that I can film the next video, which will be the video you'll seen previous to this one, where I replace my UDM Pro with a pfSense router and continue to use this to run Protect and some of my UniFi hardware. So yep, that's it. So hopefully if you found this interesting or potentially useful, if you've got one of these and you want to take the battery out of it, either because your battery has failed or you're just wanting to be overly cautious and take it out. So yeah, hopefully you found this interesting or useful or whatever. But yeah, all that's left to say is thank you very much for watching.